Hello again, and welcome back to the Daily Bread Bible Study. We are looking at Day 71 for March 11th, 2020, the last two chapters here in Joshua, closing the Joshua story, chapters 23 and 24. We'll see the character of Joshua go away, get a little introduction to the continuation of the story that will come up in the next part of the Old Testament, and get to hear Joshua's farewell speech to the Israelite people. So that we'll pick that up here in Joshua 23. We fast forward a few years to Joshua and the end of his life, his final days here on earth, as he is encouraging the Israelites with one last speech. So Joshua discusses the allotment of the promised land and reminds them that the success is because of the Lord. From Joshua 23:5, "The Lord your God will push them back before you and drive them out of your sight, and you shall possess their land as the Lord your God promised you." So any of the remaining land that is not conquered, they will get to possess it, is what Joshua says. Joshua 23:10 also says, "One of you puts to flight 1,000, since it is the Lord your God who fights for you, as he promised." But along with this success, Joshua has warnings, which foreshadow the Babylonian exile to come and some of the challenges we will read about in further books in the Old Testament. He warns about being unified with other nations, saying, "They shall be a snare and a trap for you, a scourge on your side, and thorns in your eyes." And Joshua 23:16 says, "If you transgress the covenant of the Lord your God, which he enjoined on you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and you shall perish quickly from the good land that he has given you." Joshua knows that it's important to be faithful to God and to the covenant, which is why in chapter 24 he renews the covenant and gives us some of the most famous words that we have from the Bible, especially from Joshua. In Joshua's farewell speech at Shechem, he reminds the Israelites of their story. He speaks of their ancestors Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Esau, and their trip to Egypt, though Joseph is notably absent from this story here. Joshua continues about the Exodus and the miracles God revealed under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. The 40 years wandering in the wilderness are just glossed over, and the victories given by God are mentioned, since that was what Joshua was most heavily involved with in a leadership role. Joshua ends his remembrance by stating, "I gave you land on which you had not labored, and towns that you had not built, and you live in them. You eat the fruit of their vineyards and olive yards that you did not plant." Then, in an often quoted piece of scripture, Joshua invites the Israelites to stop worshiping other gods, the gods of their ancestors beyond the Jordan, and the gods of the Amorites who were there amongst them. And he says in verse 24:15, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." This is a very often quoted piece of scripture. You will see this in signs in people's houses. It will be art. It will be everywhere. "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." This is Joshua's final statement, promising that his descendants will be faithful to God and the covenant, and invites all of the people there gathered, the Israelites at Shechem, in order to agree with this. And they respond saying, "We also will serve the Lord, for he is our God," and says that in verse 18. Everyone seems on the same page. We are going to worship the Lord. And Joshua, then after this great promise, and just reminds them that there's a cost to polytheism, to idolatry of worshiping other gods, false gods in the biblical perspective. He says it will be their downfall. And Joshua writes the covenant in the book of the law and moves a stone by a tree to be a monument of this covenant. Then after there's a testimony of it, a testimony of the covenant, and he has done his part, Joshua sends them out to celebrate that they have been successful in their inheritance and to go out to the lands of which they are called to. The next 4 verses wrap up the book of Joshua in verses 29 through 33 and include his death at 110 years of age. It says he is buried in Timnath-Serah, his inheritance, and also mentions that Joseph's bones, Joseph, who was not mentioned in the whole Exodus and Egypt foray, that he is mentioned here, that has been brought up out of Egypt, and that Joseph's bones are laid to rest in Shechem. Thus, this is a poetic and kind of formal end to the physical wandering that the Israelites had. They are at home. We see that they are at home, and then we have this kind of strange verse setting up the character of Phinehas. We have Eleazar the high priest, the son of Aaron, who is functioning as high priest in the days of Joshua. He dies and is buried at Gibeah. And his son Phinehas will take over the duties. Now remember, Phinehas was mentioned in Numbers 25 on day 59 for his noteworthy zealous actions towards God. He was praised when an Israelite man was seduced into worshiping Baal of Peor by his Midianite wife. That Israelite man, trespassed God, so God sent a plague. Phinehas understood and killed the husband and wife couple, thus stopping the idolatry and ending God's wrath and God's plague. Therefore, God blessed Phinehas to the priestly role. In Numbers 25:12 through 13, he said, "Therefore say, I hereby grant Phinehas my covenant of peace. It shall be for him and for his descendants after him a covenant of perpetual priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and made atonement for the Israelites." We see that the Israelites may be physically home, but yet we also, this Phinehas story, this character of Phinehas, his zealousness is going to come in handy, because we will also see that they're wandering spiritually, even though they are at home physically. But that is a story for another day. Thanks for sticking with the Daily Bread Bible study for the book of Joshua, and we will look forward to more books and more stories and more time together studying coming up in the future days.